Part of what I'm really going to talk about is very specific to the history of how we did the land trust, and I'm going to tell you what mistakes I think we made. And make no mistake about it, we made a few. But we were early on in the game, so when we say 40 years, it's more like 39, but I thought 40 sounded better. So, and it was a new idea, and we faced opposition from different levels of government. We faced opposition even from our own co-op members. And so how did it all start? And I've worked through that period in different roles. In the beginning, not so fundamental to it, but later on more key to the position. Questions? I already went to the wrong one.
That's a great presentation.
Yeah. Okay. It's, I think the things are pointing in the wrong way, but the machine thinks otherwise, so. Okay, so this is the first 40 years of Toronto's cooperative housing land trust. And we actually operate a bit outside of Toronto. So I'll tell you the story, and like I say, I've been there for all of it. Okay, so these are the land trusts we have. We have a land trust called the Bathurst Key. I'll do some in more detail, obviously. Colanco, Naismith nonprofit housing cooperative, which is a land trust, and the Tenants Nonprofit Redevelopment Corporation. And to give you a bit of background on CHFT, CHFT was actually founded in 50 years ago. It's our anniversary this year. And we're a membership organization, and we have over 180 co-ops within our membership, and we serve somewhere around 50,000 people. And I was away for a little while, and I think most of those 50,000 people were trying to get a hold of me on my first day back. So housing is intensive, and that's what makes it really different than anything else that we're involved in, and it's vital. It's a basic human right. So CHFT also does development, and in the beginning it wasn't necessarily using the land trust model. But we have developed over 60 housing co-ops and 6,346 units. So that's probably about 14,000 people living in our co-ops. Let's see if I can go the right way this time. Bingo. Okay, so within our structure, we have the Co-op Housing Federation of Toronto. That's the membership organization. That's the umbrella for everything. We also have a charitable fund, and we use that, as it implies, for charitable activities to help people if maybe they had a fire, to give them some resources, give them a donation to meet the incidentals. Something called the CHFT Diversity Scholarship Fund, which is huge. We've awarded 491 scholarships to people within our membership. Currently, those scholarships are $6,000 each, so it can really help a person in their education. And also, we use that as a vehicle to bring in new leadership because we have a board of directors. We give them an opportunity on the board of directors, and for the last, say, 10 years, we've averaged about 2 or 3 scholarship winners on each of our board of directors. So we have like, how many directors do we have? 9, and that's usually about 3 scholarship winners. So that's how we're bringing on younger people. And we used to do the development through CHFT, but now we find it's much more difficult. We need more expertise. We also need more expertise on the board. And so we set up the CHFT Development Society, and recently we hired our Executive Director, Heather Tremaine, who's very experienced in development. She used to live in BC, did a lot of stuff here and a lot of stuff in the Toronto area. And I'll talk more about what we're doing right now with development near the end of this. So we have a separate development society, and I'll talk about the first projects it's taking on. And then what we call Co-op Housing Land Trust is really the sum of all our different land trusts. Okay, so we started talking about these land trusts, you know, in the early 80s, and something happened to me before we started to talk about land trusts. Co-op Housing Federation of Toronto is part of the national organization, and I was involved in a number of things on a national basis. And I took a trip to the Maritimes. We did a tour of New Brunswick, saw how they were doing co-ops, a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of great activities. And just at the end of the thing, I was saying goodbye to somebody, and he said, oh, by the way, this co-op was built on land that had been land banked. I said, land banked? And that was the first inkling I got that maybe something could be done differently. I mean, I heard the term before, but to actually see a project, a community where people were living on land that was specifically held to do nonprofit housing, that was my first encounter, probably around '84. So that's when we started to think about it, and then we got involved working with something called the Tenants Nonprofit Redevelopment Co-op. And so we started with Colanco, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I'm going to run you quickly through all these, and then I'll give you a little bit more detail. The Tenants Nonprofit Redevelopment Co-op was a partnership between the tenants movement and the co-op movement, and to help tenants to buy their buildings, essentially. So that went along for a while. The Bathurst Key Community Land Trust was something we did in sometime officially around '94, but the talking about it goes way back here. So as people know, as you deal with government, there's a lot of talking involved. Not much income generation. We know that. Everybody in this room knows that at this point. So, and then the Naismith Co-op. And that was a new idea. It's basically that there's a lot of development going on in Toronto, and sometimes there were individual units we could pick up in a condominium, and so, or maybe just an individual property. So we'll talk about Naismith a little bit more later. Okay. Many, many years ago in the 80s, they were building something called the Scotiabank Plaza. And that was going to be a big, massive building, and the developers wanted to add on a couple of floors. And they were negotiating with the city, and then a community group that was not us got involved and said, if you want these extra floors, why don't you put a social benefit in? And they said, okay, after a lot of squealing. So what happened was they came to an agreement that they would work out with the city that $2 million would be set aside for nonprofit housing. And it was, Compo was a company, it's no secret, and what would happen is we would negotiate to build a new co-op building, and we had 2 years to do it. You know, so we said, okay, so the money will go in some sort of trust account, and we'll negotiate. And they didn't really want to talk to us that much. But anyways, we tried to negotiate with them. And then, but the key clause was, if an agreement is not reached, then the $2 million will be turned over to the nonprofit organization. And we said, oh, well, what about if the money came to CHFT, and what would happen if somebody sued us and we lost the $2 million that just came in the door a few months ago? So let's set up a separate corporation called Colanco. Well, I had a whole bunch of other names. That's a whole other story. But we kept changing the name and whatnot. And what about if that was a land trust? And that was really the beginning of it. Well, we didn't build the building. They, you know, and they, it was really strange. I mean, in the mid-'80s, if, you know, the lawyer says, I'm sending $2 million over, that was a lot of money by any stretch of the imagination. So we had the $2 million to build the new co-op, but we coupled that money with, there was a new provincial housing program. We took that money, and what we did was we put it into the project. There wasn't enough money to do the project. We put in $600,000 of the $2 million. And lo and behold, we had a development fund. And that's how it all started. And that development fund, that original $2 million, has generated 31 projects in one form or another. Sometimes the money flowed through, sometimes we lost money. The last time I looked, we still have $200,000 left on it. But we were able to start all these projects because we had startup money. And that's what was really the key to it all. And we still have some of that money left, and we're careful in how we spend it. But so to you know, and then there was an active amount of government programming for a number of years before it stopped. But so Colanco had this money, as it says, told you about the programs. We were able to secure some sites, so we didn't have to wait till we had a government commitment over here, and we had to wait before we could buy the site. So we bought some pretty unusual sites. We bought a motel that was going to be demolished or abolished. It should have been abolished if you knew more about it. But and we had to hold that motel, I believe, for 2 or 3 years while we went through the rezoning. But because we could put the deposit down and we weren't, you know, we had to borrow more money along the way and whatnot, but we could actually do things. And that's one of the problems that people face now, is startup money. And all the government programs I'm familiar with, boy, you have to, if there's any startup money coming from any level of government, you have to be willing to give up your firstborn. You know, it's just ridiculous because there used to be startup money. And that's, you know, if you want to do nonprofit housing, and if you're talking about doing any kind of project, owning the land is the key. So in the early days, our projects were about 110 units. Okay, so I'll just talk a little bit about, so you can see that with the Colanco money, we were able to get some pretty big projects. One in Oshawa, one in North York, but the biggest one of all was City Park Apartments, 710 units. And that's the one that we're most happy with because after all these years, they no longer have a mortgage. Gone, finito. The government didn't really want to do it because it was 3 apartment buildings, 770 units. So how is it that these 3 apartment buildings were on the market? There was a scandal called the Cadillac Fairview deal where some landlords got together and bought a whole bunch of buildings for the express purpose of ripping the tenants off. Because then they would go through and they would then flip the buildings, and the Cadillac Fairview buildings got flipped at least twice and then went into receivership. And in those days, this is by 1989, in those days I was either the executive director or the acting executive director. At this particular point, I wasn't the executive director. I was on vacation, or the real guy was on vacation, and I was just holding the fort while he was gone. Little did I know that we would come to the day that would literally change a lot of things in Toronto, and particularly my own life, and taught me to feel what it was like to be terrified about making a deal. And we went through 3 rounds with the receivership, and we won 770 units. And to jump ahead a little bit, of those 10,500 units that were flipped and reflipped a few times, City Park Apartments was the only one that became nonprofit housing. And because we decided to take a risk and we threw the dice. And we had a meeting and the board decided we're going to go for this. It was $62 or $63 million, more money than we had at the time, obviously. And so I was filling in. After the meeting, I said to the lawyer, "Are you sure about this deal?" And he said, "Yes." And so the receivership office was downtown. It was a Friday. I didn't have any meetings. I rode my bike to work. I had my short pants on, had my little helmet, and I pedaled through the traffic, got there, and I was sweating. I think it was August, but if not, it makes for a better story than it was. I got to the office, and I said, I'm here, and this is sit down. And I sat there for a while. I thought, they're not very nice people, these receivers. What have I done wrong? And then it twigged that I wasn't the courier. And they called me into the room and said, "You're a principal of the corporation?" I said, "I am the principal," slight exaggeration. They gave me a glass of water. I signed a whole bunch of papers. And that day is the day we put in the final offer on City Park. Then we had to convince the provincial government it was a good idea. We had to borrow some money. We had to do our due diligence. And a lot of the province didn't want to do it. People said, it could never form a housing co-op. They can't have a housing co-op that big. Well, 35 years later, they paid their mortgage off. They're happy. They have many complaints that they've raised to me on a regular basis. That's just part of the business. But we own, next to what used to be called Maple Leaf Gardens, we own a city block in downtown Toronto. And it was thanks to the leveraging of the money that we got. And so that's how we proceeded. And that's Colanco. More stuff about City Park later. Okay. So the Tenants Nonprofit Redevelopment Corporation was on the same model as Colanco, and they had a separate board, a separate organization, and what essentially happened is they got a lot of buildings where there were tenants, and they worked with the tenants and who wouldn't want to have a co-op rather than be flipped. So, and after the development phase, the Tenants Nonprofit Corporation came to us and said, you know, we've been on the board forever, and essentially CHFT absorbed it. And it's a pretty big organization. There's a TNRC. So they actually produced 15 housing co-ops, 1,558 units, and I always highlight the big ones here. Maybe I shouldn't, but so this one here, Woburn Village, has redevelopment potential. They're about 2-3 years away from being out of their mortgage. Forest was a great project. There's some things that are holding back the intensification of the site, but we're working with them. Okay, a lot of this I've already said. I'm going the wrong way again, am I? Maybe I got to point it the right way. Bear with me. Oh, Bathurst Quay. This is a good one. I like this. By the way, the other thing that wasn't in my bio is I'm also the president of Circle Community Land Trust. And there's a relationship between this story. So there were 3 co-ops in Toronto that were on the Crown lands. And they actually have a term like that. It wasn't coined by Netflix or anything. But the Crown decided they wanted to give the land to the city. And the city would take it over. And we said, we got an idea. We will set up a land trust. And anyway, a lot of persuasion, blah, blah. And we got that land trust. So we own the land and buildings on these 3 sites. I think most of their mortgages come up in 2044. So why did we want the land trust? Well, why would you want the land trust? It's just the crown to the city, right? Who cares? They're going to be owned by the city. Well, you know, thing is that municipalities sell off properties. And in Toronto a few years back, if you heard a little bit from Josh's presentation, but there was over 900 scattered houses in the city of Toronto. They've been bought they were expropriated for expressways that never got built, expansions of the subway that they're still talking about. But anyway, so they're all to expand parks, all these houses just sitting there. And the Ford brothers were running the city hall at the time, and they thought they could sell these 980 units, whatever it was, and they could take that money after they sold it, and then you could put it back into the social housing. Right. You heard about what the Ford brothers are selling. Oh, I'm sorry, the premier at this point giving land to the private sector and everything. And there was a very gradual citizens movement that came and said, don't sell these houses. And people said, we could take 5, we could take 7, we could take 9. But CHFT went to that first council meeting and we said, take them all and put them in a land trust. And in the long run, that's what happened. They did sell off about 10% of the portfolio. We couldn't stop it all. But in the long run, essentially the portfolio was, I think Parkdale got roughly 300 units and Circle got roughly 650 units. So we're running those 2 land trusts. And we save that housing. So to me, land in the government's hands is land not in the people's hands. If we really want to build land trusts, sometimes you're going to have to lease from a municipality or from someone else. Do it. But anytime you can, buy the land. Absolutely. And so most of the land in our land trust is owned by us. And that means we can intensify the sites. We can you know, as they like to say now, leverage the asset. We're going to be in a position to do that. So let me talk about some of the mistakes we made. I don't want to give, because as I said, I've been around from the beginning of this. And so I was there. I was part of the decisions that made those mistakes. And, you know, a lot of stuff we did was good, but I don't think you're going to run into the same problems we did, but because we were, you know, we'd gone where no one had gone before, at least in Ontario, and we did a couple of things that I'd do differently. So here's my notes. Always think of the future. And, you know, I was at a co-op, it was before the pandemic, but, and they were celebrating, the buildings were 100 years old, 100 years old. And they were very proud of that, as they should be. But as the head of the land trust, I was able to say, when I spoke to them, I know you were flipped 3 times, but you'll never be flipped again. And that's really important to people. The same thing with City Park. Flipped 3 times, you'll never be flipped again. That's why you need to own the land. And that's, you know, when you're talking about community-owned land, I'm talking about land owned by the land trust. So that's what we all have to work together to do, and I'll acknowledge that we can't always do it, but that should be the end goal. And this, you know, I was there and saw what's going to come at the other end of the journey that some of you are on right now. You're on an earlier part of the journey. It's nerve-wracking, but it's fun. So that's what I mean by thinking about the future. Think what it's going to look like after the mortgage is gone. My favorite little co-op. So what's exciting about getting 12 units in a condo? Not a lot. But we still own those, and Kim's involved in the management, and so she's doing a great job for us. A few headaches there, but now what's happening in the market in Toronto is, like, for a couple of years, I was phoning up people saying, hey, can you give us some units? You want to make a deal, Oh yeah, Tom, how you doing, that was it. Now it's like, who's this? Oh yeah, it's a developer on the other end. I talked to you 4 years ago and they're sending me letters. I sent them because the market has changed. And now they're coming to us because we have assets and we can do things through the CHFT Development Society. So again, think of the future. Always think of the future. That, our time will come and, the development market will collapse, and there's going to be ups and downs. And, there's a place in Toronto called Lakeshore Village. And in the early 90s, there was a collapse in the condo market. And we were able to convince a big-time developer to buy a chunk of land, and they thought they could build some condos on it. And we actually convinced the developer to make a deal with us, a real estate deal, where they would build not one or even two, but 6 co-ops, because the market was soft. Only 2 of those ended up in the LandTrust. Complicated story, but anyways, there's 2 out there in the LandTrust. So, always think of the future, because someday they're going to be knocking on your door. I'm not doing very good with this. Okay. So here's things that I don't think we did that were some not so good. We had a concept that the co-ops would run themselves on a day-to-day basis, and that was our original concept, because we were pushed by the members, by the government, by everybody, to have these freestanding co-ops, and that was a mistake. We really needed, I really wish that BC had been around there, because I think that the model that they're operating on in BC is much better than the way we did it. So, Tom and I talk, we go way back, but if you were in Josh's workshop, he talked about how they were managing the asset. That's the way to go, not create a building and just kind of let things flow, because residents don't have the expertise to manage the asset. This is not anti-democratic. If you view it that we are the maintaining the land and working for the future, then making sure that the asset is in good shape really helps. And I always say, if you want to do community development, the first step is good property management. And so that's the thing we have to work on. Be better in managing the asset, be better in property management. Okay, having their own board of directors. Of course, the co-ops, like here in BC, still have their own board of directors. That's great. Now, all these properties have a 49-year lease with the LandTrust. So they're at about 35 now, and people are saying, what happens to us at the end of the lease? And so we're at a turning point, because we're also saying, okay, we brought you this land. We know you weren't in a position to pay lease payments. Here we are, year 35. What your lease says is that you're going to be paying lease payments to the LandTrust. And that for us at this point is a game changer because they're paying the lease payments. It gives us a development fund. It gives us a fund to put it back into the co-op, you know, because we're saying to the co-op, you have reserves, we have reserves. You do a project, we're going to give you 50% of the money for it. So it encourages them to fix up the buildings quicker. But we're also going to manage that capital work. So that was, I think, a good decision we made. And the post-mortgage contribution is really critical to strengthen the land trust in the long run. But with the land lease, we're now negotiating a new land lease with people. We're amending the land lease, and it's changing the responsibilities between the co-op and us. And in exchange for that, we're extending the lease. So it's not going to be 49 years. So you got another 15 years. I'm not going to say this will be the final way, but we'll probably give them another 25 years. And so relax. You're there for 40 years. There'll be somebody else to negotiate with at that point. So, and people like it because we can fix some of the things that we didn't do correctly. So that was you know, that was the safety valve we had. And you know, I just have to mention one person in particular who's really been a genius in dealing with this stuff. It's our lawyer, Bruce Lewis. Bruce Lewis thought through all this stuff, and Bruce has really come up with some great ideas. And also, you know, things like the Island LandTrust in Toronto, came out of Bruce Lewis's head. TNRC, CA, all this stuff came out of Bruce's head. And I swear that I talk to him every day. He's got a lot of great ideas. He's working on stuff. So again, post-mortgage contribution to land trust, think of the future. You know, people, you know, you want to talk about a legacy? We're talking about building a legacy for the land trust. We're talking about building a legacy where we can, you know, we can add more units. We're talking about not just intensify the site, but have money so we can make deposits on new sites. That's what we're working on. Am I going the wrong way again? Yeah. It was a long flight I had. I actually just came back from vacation, so in the last week I've got like a 9-hour time gap in the time. So I'm still, yeah, I'm still thinking I'm on the beach in Spain, but here I am. So, okay. I'm going the wrong way again? Okay. Also having slight memory loss. Now, think of the future. You know, I don't know if you noticed there were a lot of stories about housing co-ops in, you know, last January, February, and it was all about the excitement about this new project, which we're not totally there yet, but we've been working on this since 2021. This is the biggest co-op in the last 30 years, and it was fun, you know, because reporters were saying to me, "Isn't it great that co-ops are back?" And I said, "We didn't go anywhere. We've been here all along." But 612 units will be part of the land trust. Now, this, unfortunately, is the exception. We will be leasing the land. Okay, that was part of the deal. It's a 99-year lease, so it's not something I'm going to have to deal with, hopefully. But this is our big future project. We submitted to the CMHC program. They phoned us the other day and said they didn't spot any problems, but God knows They'll have an opportunity to think of a few, I'm sure. Going the wrong way again? Yes? Okay. Okay, here it is. We actually submitted 4 projects in 1 week to the different levels of government. I don't have one listed here. So 4 projects. Kennedy Green, 612. Ruth and Terry Greer, 180 units. And one we're just calling Bayview, 26 units. And there's another one we submitted for. We had not submitted so many projects in the last 30 years. So that's because we have the CHFT Development Society. That's because we have a little bit of a war chest now. And that's because government has caught up to us, right? They realize that co-op housing is one of the options. So that's where we're at right now. And all of these will be in the LandTrust. So right now we have something like 4,200 units in our different land trusts. And so this will put us up. We'll be getting close to 5,000, I guess. And that's what we went through. Let me see. Think of the future. Oh, property management. This is a key area where we've run into problems. We really have to work as land trusts to have excellent property management. I'm worried about land trusts and the corporate governance because you're kind of running multiple corporations in a relatively small infrastructure. So I think finding ways to work on that, to partner with other land trusts, that's why this conference is so important, and not to work in isolation. Again, this conference is important for that. Owning your land is obviously really important. And the thing you have to do if you're managing property, like sometimes you're really struggling just to buy the property, you have to build your reserves. Otherwise, in decades, you're not going to be able to maintain the buildings. So these things are really important because this new movement, and it's a new movement, is moving forward quickly. You can see what's happening in different land trusts. Like if you were at the Parkdale presentation this morning, they're already keen on asset management, way ahead of our thinking was at that point. CHFPC, way ahead on the asset management stuff. These things are important. They may not sound glamorous, but believe me, they are. And making sure that whatever kind of land trust you're running, that people have a voice. So those are, I'm going to try in the last 2 slides to use the machine the right way. Okay. No. I tell you, that red dot's in the wrong place. Okay. This is the CHFT Board of Directors. We're proud of our diversity, and it comes in part through the Diversity Scholarship Program. You can see there are some young people there. Our president for the last couple of years is 30 years old, scholarship winner. This young man, scholarship winner. This woman, mother of a scholarship winner. Our vice president, scholarship winner. Wherever you are in the movement, to always think of the future, to build a new leadership. That's what this is all about. And I'm totally in awe of this conference to see what everybody's doing, all the energy that you're bringing. And, Tommy Douglas once said, it's never too late to change the world. So that's what we got to do. I'll take questions. Go ahead.
Hi. I just have a question about your finances. Like, how are you managing to operate all of these projects?
So, like the membership side of what CHFT does is financed by our member dues. And, because we have a big organization, that's okay. How we're doing all these, we,
So
on it,
sorry, so for, because you mentioned there's three different
Yeah.
organizations, so one is being financed by your membership?
the key organization is financed by our membership. Charitable funds financed by what we can generate, and the land trusts are managed, by the post-mortgage rent and all this stuff. So that's how we're doing it. So right now, our projected budget for next year is about $2 million. Yeah. I can talk to you about it in more detail.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we can even do it by email. Go ahead.
Do you have any experience taking something that's transitioned? Like, have you had any projects where, like, the city has leased you a property and you eventually convinced the city to actually give it to you, to actually have that ownership in the land trust? And any kind of tips for making that happen, or any success in that?
Yeah, that's kind of what happened with the Bathurst Key. Like, they were going to take the lease, and we said, we got a better idea. And they said, okay, but we're going to put a few people on your board. Knock yourself out. Like, nobody more than social activists do a better job of coming to meetings, right? The city people are too busy, right? They retired. Some of them are dead. They haven't replaced them, so we got the majority. Go ahead.
Charitable designation, was that challenging for you, and how critical is that to your operations?
It just gives us another vehicle. A good lawyer will be able to do that for you. It shouldn't be a problem, but you have to do charitable works. Like, we have a small fund within just for development, but our big thing is for the scholarship, and like, we have two simple things. It's relief of poverty and education. Well, almost everything we do is covered under one of them. So, okay, sorry. Did you have a question? No? Okay, go ahead.
With the transfer of assets from the city to the land trust, does it matter how they do that? Like, did it go through, do you realize the full equity from that transfer? Because you didn't actually pay for it with money out of your bank account?
Well, I would say, like, on our plan is, if we get a situation like that, until the mortgage is paid off, they would not be paying lease payments to us. But we're kind of, city's leasing it to us and we're leasing it to them, and that's kind of the way it's going. Because there'll be a separate co-op in there that leases from the land trust, and in turn we lease from the city, and that's the general plan. We'll see how it goes through, but I think that's a viable.
Leasing from the city, they haven't actually given you title.
No, it's going to be a 99-year lease. Yeah. So, and that's definitely not our preferred way of doing it, but I don't see any option here.
Is there anybody that you know of that's gotten a pathway to ownership that's shorter than 99 years?
Well, not that I know of, but I'm sure there's somebody who made a deal somewhere, yeah. But that's why, if you can buy it right out, and, to be honest, if I had my way, like, when we had our greatest growth was when we were trying to buy all the land. So that is a quicker pathway, because you eliminate one level of government you're dealing with. And like, almost everybody I've talked to here, everybody goes, oh, the government, like, it's so complicated. Like, they just throw roadblocks in there, and yeah. So I haven't figured it out, but if I do, I'll tell you. Go ahead.
I wonder if you could speak more about the governance of the land trust and how that relates with the CHFT and the component co-ops.
Yeah, so the governance of the land trust is essentially long-term co-op people who are activists and who've been on the land trust, and sort of and there's different connections, but they tend to be people who had served on the CHFT board for some time, and now they're on the separate corporation. But we're reevaluating our whole governance. Like, we're going through this other stage now, but there's separate boards for the land trust, There's separate board for CHFT, separate board for the charitable fund, and some of it is overlapping, but it's getting too complicated. I actually have I'll show you on the way out, like, this is a CHFT structure. Can't even remember it. It's too complicated. I'll show you on the way out. Yeah, so anything you can do to simplify the governance. I like what they're doing in BC. They have a good model. They've simplified it a lot. But everybody comes from a different situation, you know, and we made choices that now look like they weren't the best. But this is what our members wanted. Like, we had a whole task force of our members, and now we're evolving into a new stage. And, you know, the good thing about switching jobs frequently is you only hear about later about the things that you didn't do correctly. It's great to have a long-term job and get a regular paycheck. I'm totally into it. But if you stay a long time, you go, oh my God, that was bonehead, and I thought of it. So I have a much tougher list, but I don't want to state it publicly, especially since we're being recorded. But anyways, go ahead.
Can you speak of, you did a lot of development in the 80s and up until a certain point, and then there was no development for a period of time, and now you're getting back into it. Could you speak for a moment about how you had to rebuild that resource team within your organization?
Well, first it was really hard, because what's happened is all the former developers who are nonprofit developers have either retired or passed on, or so there's not a lot of existing experience. So we're hiring people now who have good technical skills, and that's part of the way we're doing it. And there's a number of courses we're sending them to, but like, we have a mechanical engineer managing our LandTrust, so we were able to attract her, another person with an engineering background. You know, we have a good person who's a head of development now, but it's been hard to get the money to do it. And it's been interesting, because people do want to come and work with us at CHFT, and highly skilled people, because they see we're trying to do things. You know, lots of people are trying to do things, but at this particular time, we're trying to regenerate some of the stuff. So we've been lucky to attract a lot of good people. Go ahead.
So I work for the Kensington Market Community Land Trust, and we're much smaller than CHFT, and we know each other. But what do you think CHFT and these other, you know, more legacy co-ops and land trusts can do to help support this next generation of land trusts? Because you guys were, you know, made a lot of moves in the 80s. Now you have this, you know, annual lease funds coming in, and you have a reserve funds. And you see these other ones kind of popping up across Toronto, across Canada, that are more neighborhood-based, very localized,
Yeah.
have no reserve funds and no equity, right? So do you see a relation between places like CHFT?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things in Toronto and even in Ontario, like, we have an extensive buying program. You know about that. So we would make it available to them. But I know that we're being approached to make some investments in the other land trusts, and we will. You have my word on it. You have it on record. So it's just us getting our ducks in a row. And, you know, like, we had to make 2 deposits in about 2 weeks, and they totaled $750,000. So any money that I might have sent your way, I just got an email that some money's coming back. But yeah, we're committed to working with the other land trusts. I see the land trust movement as it's in many ways like the co-op movement in the 70s. It's got vision, it's got determination, it's got youth, and as long with organizations that are being set up and relationships that are being set up between the land trusts, I see a bright future. But scale is important, and we have to figure out how to scale up everybody. And you don't have to scale. When I say scale, you don't have to amalgamate Kensington and Parkdale, but you have to have a working partnership of some kind. You know, in Ontario, there's 5 Ontario federations that have members, co-ops in all of them, all a lot smaller than Toronto. A number of years ago, we came up with this idea of a memorandum of cooperation that outlined how these different groups would relate and how the national body would relate to us, and it was a game changer. But you have my word, okay? I know we wanted to get it on record, so. Anybody else? Oh, you again.
Do you understand, like, for the land trust you guys have, what security do you have in place to ensure that if they did go into receivership or default, that land falls back into CHFT or that falls back into other co-ops? It's something I've been thinking about as we see more and more land trusts come up, is what are we putting in place to make sure they're secure?
Well, it could be an individual site that goes into problems, but the land trust has a lease to take it back. I did have a major concern that land trust might run into problems, and I think we need to work together. But to some, the TNRC never ran into big problems. They decided that it was better. It was like a friendly merger. So that's, you know, if Kensington was running into problems, to have an agreement with other land trusts that somehow you could become the same organization, bearing in mind that you might put the other organization at risk. But we did it with TNRC without a problem. Anybody else?
Yeah, I was just wondering how, when you were getting started, how you managed to take away the fear that this guy just mentioned. You know, you're gonna go, you're gonna get a mortgage, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do that. Like, so what was the process that you went through to allay those fears so that you could go forward? And I know you're talking about think of future, think of legacy, what's it gonna look like when the mortgage is
Yeah.
gone. But how did you get people to get on board so that there was a willingness to move forward?
Well, you know, those people that were going to most directly be affected, they were getting, the promise to them was the housing, and the mortgage would be, the individual co-op would have to pay it, but ultimately the mortgage kind of belonged to the land trust. So people, but you know, we've been around 50 years now, and so at that point, CHFT was pretty well established. It says we were founded in '74, but people were around doing things before then, and people knew, you know, like when I got involved in buying City Park, I'd already been involved in the movement for 11 years. So, you know, some people said, Tom's just, you know, he's a little off on this one, but most people said, okay, let's do it. So it's getting stable leadership, getting a track record, you know, like when I see what land trusts are doing, really innovative stuff that even we didn't think of, you know, so it's pretty exciting what's going on. Okay, okay, so thank you, everyone.